Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast where a behavioral scientist examines what it's like to live a humorous life. Glimpse into the lives of the funniest people in entertainment, business, and science as your host, Dr. Peter McGraw, explores their habits, motivations, and secrets to success. Get ready to fire up your brain and your funny bone. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast that looks at the lives of funny people. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Lawrence Williams. Lawrence is an associate professor of marketing at the University of Colorado Boulder, where he studies less than obvious influences on consumers' thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. His friends describe him as the Obi-Wan Kenobi of designated driving. Welcome, Lawrence.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for having me.
So Lawrence, if you weren't working as a professor, as a research scientist, what would you be doing?
Good question. It's a question I've asked myself recently. I think I would be trying to make it as a writer, like a screenwriter, maybe doing something way more creative and living a little bit more sort of week to week, month to month, trying to get ideas out, trying to push ideas onto the page and make characters come to life and that sort of thing. I've been attracted to the sort of fantasy of being a writer and a sort of creator, like if it's comic books when I was growing up, or movies when I got a little bit older, novels when I got a little bit older. So I guess that idea is still lingering enough so that was top of mind, but I don't know. Being a professor is a pretty sweet gig.
Yeah, I was going to say, you definitely would be giving up some security for... Actually, you'd be pretty much choosing to give up a hard job for a harder job.
In essence, I think it'll be more challenging. I don't like ambiguity as a rule, so it would be going well outside my comfort zone to not know where my pay is coming from.
You know, I think I think these fantasies are important. It's nice to have them. You know, my example of this is basketball players want to be rappers and rappers want to be basketball players.
Yeah. I mean, there's always that like grass is greener on the other side sort of vibe to it. Mm-hmm. But it's also just thinking about what are the skills that I have and what are the interests that I have and how could those translate to other contexts. And some of it's probably just preparation, not knowing like, is the world going to be the same 2 years, 3 years from now if you're a basketball player and you don't know if your skills are going to be there in 3 years or if your body's going to be there in 3-5 years? Just kind of thinking about what other aspects of your life would allow you to make a living. I don't know. I don't have either basketball or rap skills, so this is definitely trying to extrapolate from a limited base of knowledge.
Well, I have played basketball with you. I have never tried to rap with you. Although we went to karaoke.
But that's, what is that? That's not.
That's not real. So first of all, you are a fantastic writer. Like, I envy your writing abilities.
I appreciate that.
And I know this because we've written papers together. And so I know what the writing looks like when it arrives on your inbox. And I know what it looks like when you finish with it. One of many reasons I enjoy doing research with you. So have you tried any creative writing?
Nothing really that's worth talking about, I guess is the right answer. I have I've started many things, I guess, and I haven't gotten to a point where I feel like this is ready for the world or someone else needs to see this. Like usually I find myself writing for myself. Sometimes that takes the form of journaling. Sometimes it's like, maybe this will be a blog or this could be a blog post or this is the start of a story. I don't know how it's going to end, but I don't know. Life gets in the way a little bit. Work gets in the way. Like actual work is hard to devote a very extensive amount of time to writing for pleasure and then kind of have like piling up on my desk things that actually need to get written for this professor job.
Yeah, indeed. So So tell me about your writing practice. I know like you do like Thursday's a day for writing for you. Is that right?
Yeah, I try to take the better part of a day. I usually leave the office. I like to be around people, but not people that I care about a ton. So like I'll go to a coffee shop.
So most of the world.
Yeah, in essence. For me, like what's useful is to be able to sort of focus on what I'm doing by tuning other things out.
Uh-huh.
So it's not the most natural process, but in essence, I need some activity around me that sort of like motivates me to key in on what I'm trying to do. So I like there to be just like a hum of activity, like writing in a coffee shop is great for that. Setting up in the spot for as long as I can, as long as I feel comfortable. Like I try to, like order something every hour or so, every 90 minutes, but there's only but so many things on a coffee shop menu that can sustain you for the better part of a day. But that's been, some of that is intentional. Some of that is just, the way that life is organized right now. As you know, I have kids. Mm-hmm. As you know, I teach sometimes. So a lot of my writing is sort of trying to find like a good moment, carve out that time, so that I can reserve it, and whoever is sufficiently important, knows that this is what I'm doing that day.
I see. Actually, I see you at my coffee shop sometimes. I think a lot of people, they kind of struggle with that idea of going to a coffee shop. When you have a perfectly good office, you probably have a home office. But I feel that same way. First of all, I think writing in a coffee shop feels less like work. And the more I can make my work feel like I'm not working, feels good to me. The other one is I find that same thing, it's sort of stimulating enough.
Yeah.
That it has, if you're at home,
it gets too quiet.
It gets too quiet. And
there are too many distractions for me, at least at home. So yes, It's very easy to start off the plan of okay, I'm writing from home today. Mm-hmm. And that'll go fine for 15 minutes. And then an email comes in, a knock on the door, just any weird sound is enough to be I should figure out what's going on. Check that out.
So when I got serious about writing, I did a lot of reading about writing. And one of the things that helped me feel better about the difficulty I had writing was all these great writers talked about how difficult it was to write. Just how emotionally painful it was, and how there's so many starts and stops and moments of agony. Everything feels too slow, et cetera, right? The saying is just, if you want to be a writer, just sit at a typewriter and open a vein. You know, that idea. So do you find your writing to have that element to it? Or is the difficult part just finding the time and space?
It's a good question. It depends on what I'm writing. If I'm writing for work, I find that it's time and space. And I think that some part of that is probably due to it's not as personally I'm not as involved in it. Personally, I'm not really dealing with a ton of emotions. I'm not dealing with the nature of the feedback that we get, and our job is sufficiently impersonal where I don't feel that pressure that much. Mm-hmm. But if I sit down to write something
by the way, impersonal means shitty. Is really for the listener. You get a bunch of shitty feedback. That it feels bad, and then also half of it you probably don't agree with.
Yeah, that's you can argue with it pretty
easily. Yeah, easily. That's right. Yeah. Half of it's good, but
yeah, we do this work. We review other people's work. We're trying to do a good job of it, but that for me it feels very different than if I'm writing something for myself. If I have an idea and I want to get it out and I want it to be faithful to the initial idea and the sort of the set of feelings that I had when it first came to be, I do feel that agony. I think that's why I don't produce as much along those lines. I recognize the difficulty. For me, sort of like playing around with that difficulty is part of the process, is part of what keeps it interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not necessarily motivating.
Yeah, I get it. Now, why haven't you written a book yet?
Yeah,
you're like the perfect person to write a book.
Lack of motivation, maybe. The work that we do, like, there's not like a direct correspondence between how we are rewarded in writing books.
That's true. As I know. Yeah, you have to, I think, as an academic, at least here, I mean, I think there are universities that do reward it. One of your alma maters rewards it. We'll get to that later. You have to do it for yourself. So it can't be, or it has to work some other game, but it doesn't, in terms of your day-to-day full-time employment, if anything, it's probably a slight negative.
It definitely could potentially sort of raise it can make people argue for the idea that you're spending your time writing this book, and that's time that could have been more effectively spent producing papers.
That's true. Yeah.
Right.
So for listeners who are not familiar so Lawrence is my colleague, if you haven't figured this out, and he's 3 doors down from me. I've known him for 10 years. I've known you for 10 years. I was looking at your Vita earlier today. I was like, damn.
It's been a while.
You look exactly the same, and I look 10 years older.
Yes, I thought that this morning when I was getting ready to come in. So I knew we would be on video. I was like, I should shave a little bit and like trim up the beard. And then I was like looking at the like lines on my face. It's like, man, like this feels very familiar to like coming here.
You look,
10 years ago.
Well, there's perhaps it's mildly racist saying.
Which one is that?
Black don't crack.
That mildly racist, just on the like tiniest.
It's true though. It is slightly racist though. All right. So sorry for that. No. But, boy, that relates to other things that we have to talk about. Okay. So yeah. So we live in a world where you get rewarded for teaching a good class and publishing great papers. Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward equation.
Yeah.
And so anything you do that either gets in the way of teaching a good class or writing great papers is seen by your peers as a distraction, as being not serious in some way. I get it. So you mentioned earlier you have a family.
Yes.
And so you do research on meaning.
I do.
Which I couldn't help but wonder has been informed or motivated in part by having a family. And just so you know, this is for the listeners to understand how Lawrence thinks about his family. He has a quote that says, "Mainly, I aim to help my kids grow from amazing, unbridled goal pursuit machines into amazing, fully functioning humans."
That is the goal.
That's
the goal. It takes a lot.
It's written above your bed.
It's just like a mantra I recited to myself.
We might be able to cut a few words from that and make it a little punchier, but I get the point.
That was going on the website. You want content. I often like find myself writing things and I have a weird view of an audience where it's like, if you have the patience for what I have to say, then I'm okay with you.
Then we're going to get along.
Yeah. And I don't like have this like natural, like let's like punch it up or let's give it a lot of appeal, because generally it's like, I don't want to appeal to a ton of people.
See.
But yeah, it can be edited some, that idea.
Okay. So your research on meaning, turning these unbridled goal pursuit machines into fully functioning humans.
Yeah, it's how that work came from a different place.
Why don't you, what is the work?
Like we were marketing professors, but we're both trained as psychologists.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the sort of fun aspects of work, at least for me, has been thinking about things that we either know in psychology or take for granted in psychology, and how to make that information useful for a marketing audience. And it could be, people on the outside who are actually doing the work of marketing. When they look to academics, what do they find interesting? It can be for consumers. As you're exposed to marketing and you think about your own either reactions, your feelings, your emotions, how can you use anything that we have to say to make your life better? And we started thinking about meaning and consumption. So the things that we buy, the things that we use, the things that we, the places we go, the services we use. Where's the intersection between those activities, that can feel very shallow in a materialistic world? How do we let those activities inform who we are as people and sort of elevate us and provide that sense of meaning and belonging and connection to the things that we care about in life?
Okay.
And a lot of that is informed by like various branches of psychology. A lot of it came from trying to get a better handle on why people enjoy negative things. So we
like having children.
Yes. Like this is in that way.
Or raising children.
Yeah, making children probably is not the issue. It's the retaining, the retention of children.
I have to say, I don't have, as you know, I don't have children. I think having children would be so anxiety producing for me.
Why is that?
It's the way I'm wired. I'm naturally really vigilant. And so I'm always on the lookout for problems. And so, it's part of the reason I'm successful is because I'm a good planner. I'm on top of things and so on. If you add a couple kids to the mix, you got to keep them alive and healthy. It would turn the volume up on that a lot.
Yeah, I understand that very intimately. I'm very similar. Like I think that my, to the extent that I have had any success in life, like it's come from a bit of a defensive position. I'm trying to avoid bad outcomes. Like some people say maybe that's not the best way to go, but like that's definitely the way that I'm wired.
Spoken like a true academic. This field is filled with people with that mindset.
Spoken like a person who grew up in New Jersey.
Well, yeah. We've been dancing around our backgrounds. We'll get to them shortly.
But yeah, to the point about like meaning and consumption, and we have all of these things that we experience them as aversive when we like watch a horror movie, when we like read a tragic play.
When you exercise, yeah, right? Like we sort of push ourselves to these limits and want to sort of indulge in negative feelings. And when we started this project, the question is kind of like, why do we do that? Why is there value in consuming negative feelings? And along the way, like we really started to think about, well, the value comes in this idea that without those negative experiences, it's difficult to get meaning from consumption. It's difficult to find a meaningful aspect to exercise if it's all pleasant and breezy and easy. It's difficult to sort of see the sort of meaning and interactions with other people or interactions with our community, interactions with values that we care about, unless there's some kind of like pain component, like some complexity to the emotional experience is probably a better way of putting it. And in that way, yeah, child rearing falls into that category. It's not consumption in the same way, but it's definitely one of those aspects of my life, at least, where I get, I think, a ton of meaning when I sort of think about what did my kids do today? Like, what were their new experiences, and what are the things that they said to me now that they weren't able to say to me 2 years ago because of their development, and how can I sort of do a better job at sort of protecting and fostering that? Mm-hmm. Those conversations with myself are also like probably the most meaningful parts of my day. I see. So, yeah, it's interesting is like there's, first of all, I think marketing as a field thinks about people's needs largely wrong. Like, I think that the models that are being used in the field are incomplete at best.
In what way?
Well, I think the most common models that you see used is like either a hedonic versus utilitarian kind of model, a very basic, you're either doing something for pleasure or to accomplish something.
Yep.
Or even worse, like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs kind of model.
Yep.
Which is, frankly, I think wrong. And I think that these models, I mean, I don't even know what the third model would be. I mean, I guess there's been some glimpses of some evolutionary stuff, but they're not widely adopted. And so in that way, I think the problem is if you start with a bad model, it leads to blind spots.
Yes.
And I think that both marketing practitioners and also marketing scholars, when they have those blind spots, then they're just either not good at answering these sort of theoretical questions that we puzzle over, or the real practical solutions that regular everyday people really care about.
Exactly.
And frankly, I think these models don't give people enough credit for being complex and being interesting. So so on my first day of class, I actually teach Maslow, and then I deconstruct it and point out the problems with it and point out the good things about it. And then I eventually move on and I talk about the PERMA model.
Okay.
So this is Martin Seligman's model I've talked about on the pod before. I have found it personally very useful and professionally incredibly useful, which talks about these different paths to living a good life. And what I like about it is the paths that lead to your good life are naturally going to be different paths than lead to mine.
Of course.
And those are revealed in our past decisions. And as one of our students has, Erin Percival Carter looked at in her dissertation, depends on where are you in the developmental cycle, natural things that happen in your, shocks that happen in your life and so on, that can shift your priorities at any one time, to these things. To these different elements. And so I'll post something about the PERMA model, at the bottom of the post for this blog, but it has pleasure, right? As you were just talking about pleasure, the goodness or badness of your feelings, which is pretty much always on. It's always happening. It's primary in the sense that like we're experiencing it, but whether we value it or not depends on these other things. Engagement. So creative pursuits, like you were saying, like working on a screenplay or personal journaling, can be that. Relationships, you mentioned that also. Meaning, purpose in life, and then achievement. Getting your PhD, getting tenure, these kinds of things. And so I think whole areas of that stuff are completely overlooked. And yet, if you take into account that someone might be pursuing achievement in their life at a particular time, it gives rise to a whole different set of problems.
In terms of the other dimensions.
No, in terms of the things that they're seeking as solutions.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
The activities, products, and services and offerings, the way that they go about problem solving. In their life versus someone who's engaged in kind of relationship pursuits.
Got it. So yeah.
I'm not claiming that the PERMA model is perfect, but to me, it's a
useful starting point for sure.
I find that
the way that I think about it, I think that you have to understand what people are trying to do if you want to serve them. So we talk about needs. I think it's more useful to think about goals, because goals are going to be just closer to where the person is and sort of a more reliable route towards satisfaction.
Yes.
Right. And we can pursue multiple goals that support the same underlying need, but knowing what the goals are gives you better access into knowing the person.
So give an example of that. So, because we're throwing around we sound like two boring academics right now.
Yes.
And the listeners are used to funny, sweet talking people, not.
we get funny,
not needs.
and yeah.
Needs goals, higher order.
Yeah, this is definitely not where I thought the conversation was going.
We're going. I got us going to places.
All right. So, for example, you mentioned achievement, right?
Yes.
So we're both achievement oriented,
No doubt.
and in some ways, the sort of the goals by which we accomplish achievement, or the goals by which we feel fulfilled on that dimension, if we're thinking about PERMA,
I see.
they might differ between us. So for you, like, you have sort of like a wide complement of activities that you're doing that are tied to achievement, right? The pod is one of those, but there are many other things. And if I were trying to speak to you from a marketing perspective, kind of knowing what your goals are with respect to achievement is going to be a more reliable way to market to you than just knowing that you're achievement oriented, right? Compared to me, like, the way that I think about achievement might be partially influenced by these other, like, PERMA dimensions. So they might have more of a relational focus, for example, or they might be more narrow in their focus, for example. So someone who wanted to talk to me about, like, I can help you with your achievement needs, they're going to need a different angle than they would use.
Yeah, indeed. So let's talk about some other things. So when I look at my life, I feel like I've come a long way since my days as a Jersey boy. I mean, not only 1,500 miles away, and living in the West actually is metaphorically, I think, apt. But when I feel pretty good about myself sometimes, like, boy, I really pulled this off.
Yeah.
My joke is that if you plugged all my attributes into a linear model, it would spit out that I'm supposed to be managing an enterprise rent-a-car. You know, and so
I was going to say Kinko's. So. Close enough.
So, I think that's worse. Is that worse?
It could be, if you're, like, holding on to, like, the last Kinko. Everyone else had transitioned to FedEx office, and then, like, you just have, like, the Kinko sign over your storefront.
Both of those jobs are going away, so it's bad. I can feel pretty good about myself. I mean, not smugly, although, you know, I mean, really mostly gratefully, to be honest. And then I look at your life and I'm like, well, looks like Lawrence's, so I guess my question is, do you plug all your attributes into a regression model and it predicts it doesn't predict undergraduate Harvard, PhD Yale, tenured professor at Colorado.
No, not necessarily.
Okay, so what does this spit out?
Yeah, I mean, so it could be manager or middle manager at, like, a phone bank rental car place. That sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of, like, what's my...
You see Sorry to Bother You? Have you seen that yet?
I did see that, yeah.
Is that you, Cassius, what's his name? Williams or whatever his name is?
Yeah, that movie resonated with me on a number of levels. I thought it was very well done. But my brother actually worked at a call center
okay.
For a while. So, and there was, like, enough physical resemblance between him and Lakeith where it took on, like, a very, like, personal and weird, surreal quality.
To watch the movie.
Yeah, exactly. Like, watch it with my brother and mine, and, like, really, like, the life that my brother lives, the life that my sister lives, the life that many of my relatives live, like that. There's no real great reason why that's not my life right now. I think the one attribute that would go into that regression model that would throw it into disarray a little bit is that when I was growing up, I didn't care enough about what other people in my local environment thought of me. And I often think that lack of concern, like, it's a little bit of sort of being on the spectrum or something like that, but, like, this is, like, a little bit of a lack of natural empathy, or empathy may not be the right way to think about it, but, like, I just didn't care enough about what other people said, about what I was up to, about how people sort of reacted to what I was doing, either in school or out of school.
So you're saying that? Hold on, I want to interrupt because I have a question about this. My mind is racing right now because it's something I just read. You were an outstanding student.
I did well in school. Like I would
you must
say,
have got tracked into higher classes.
Not the whole way. So I did well in school from the third grade through the rest of school, let's say.
Okay.
In the beginning, I was not doing very well. So I almost failed kindergarten.
That's hard to do, man.
I got hit by a car and then I didn't go enough days or something like that. But I also had enough behavioral issues where there wasn't anyone who was really advocating I see. This kid deserves a chance or something like that. I didn't have that relationship with any teacher until probably high school. I think it wasn't until the 8th grade that I got sort of put on some track of talented, gifted, I forget exactly
college
what
prep
called,
kind of
that sort of thing. That didn't happen until I was partway through the 8th grade, and it was really, really surreal because it was midway through the school year. I had gotten randomized into this new middle school that they formed. And, I grew up in the city of Elizabeth, and they were transitioning from a 4 middle school system to a 5 middle school system. And they just took a random selection of kids from the 4 existing schools to make up the new school in that year. And that place was a disaster.
Is that right?
It was a throwback to, what is that movie, Lean on Me,
Oh yeah, that's right.
It kind of had those vibes of just no one in this building cares about anything that's happening, and it was very surreal. And some very kind person took pity on me there and was this kid does not belong here, and made some push to get me into the talented, gifted, whatever.
I see. Yeah, Elizabeth is a tough town for all the non-Jersey listeners out there. Okay, wait. So you were saying, but this idea, I want to get at this idea. So you're saying that you kind of had this I don't care attitude, and was it that you didn't? Was it normally would there be pushback for you doing well in school, and you didn't care that? What I don't understand is where were the pressures coming from, and how were you buffeted or buffered by that I don't care philosophy?
Yeah, I think that, so it comes in a few ways. So growing up, if you're a nerd, you're singled out, right?
Mm-hmm.
When adults like you too much, your peers don't like that a ton.
Mm-hmm.
And when your concerns don't match up with what everyone else is up to, then you get goofed on for that, right? So, in the neighborhood, playing football with the kids in the building that I grew up with, sometimes I did that and sometimes I didn't. And if you didn't, can you swear?
Yeah. I have comedians on here. They say, and everything they say is going to be worse than what you say.
Okay. So if you're out and you either express a lack of interest in playing football, then kids call you a pussy. Or if you say I want to play and then you don't play well, then kids call you a pussy. and you can there's a way of responding to that type of feedback, which is I'm going to get good at this. I'm going to get good at playing football.
Yes.
I'm going to get good at doing the things that the kids in the neighborhood are doing that are high valued in this neighborhood. And I just didn't care enough about that feedback to react in that way.
I see.
So I kind of stuck to the things that I was interested in. It's not I was interested in anything super special. I wasn't building rockets in my backyard or something like that. It was.
You're reading.
Yeah. Just, reading, trying to learn to speak a little bit, I guess. I was kind of active in my church, things like that.
Yeah, I read this. I I don't know where I picked it up, but I picked up this phrase about like writing is like exercise and reading is like nutrition. And so but the issue is like the value of good nutrition in the same way that the value of exercise is not, you don't feel it immediately. It actually takes a long time to benefit from it. And a lifetime of eating well and a lifetime of exercise, leads to a strong body in the same way that many years of reading and many years of writing, lead to ideas and a craft and so on. So I just finished this book called Hackers and Painters by Paul Graham. So Paul created a company, sold it, and then I think is one of the founders of Y Combinator. He's a very bright, thoughtful guy. And what's interesting, I like the book, it's a little uneven, but he starts the book out about nerds. He starts talking about nerds in a completely unscientific way. And it's interesting because what he says is very similar to what you just said, which is, why do nerds get picked on? Well, they get picked on because they're different, and they're different in the ways that you just described. They're like, teachers and parents like them, and, they care about these things that aren't exactly mainstream, although in hindsight, we wish that they were, and so on. And he makes the case, first of all, I think pretty explicitly, that nerds in the long run win.
Yeah.
And which I agree. And I remember having that moment of clarity as a high school student where my sister was making fun of me for being a nerd. And I just remember saying, well, if it means that I'm going to go to college and I'm going to be able to get a job and, earn a living, and then you can call me a nerd. You know what I mean? Like, if that's the equation, then sign me up, kind of a thing. And what he made an argument is that nerds care about being smart more than they care about being cool. And I mean, of course, they still feel the tension and they feel the pain, getting back to your idea about negative emotion. Yeah. Actually, it probably, nerds have stories, 7th, 8th grade especially, that in some ways probably adds meaning to their achievements.
Certainly. To
get back. Like the fact that you were bullied and picked on, called these names, not a good athlete, etc., makes this a little bit more meaningful, I think is the argument you would make.
I think so. I think that's definitely a way that we would think about it in our work. I don't think about it that way personally I don't know exactly why. Like, I think that some of it is just tied to just trying to think about, like, more about situations and less about me. Mm-hmm. So, like, when I think about what's happened in my life that sort of causes me to be where I am, or sort of like led to like the sort of delta between where I started and where I wound up, I tend to focus on like, well, what were the circumstances? So like this person who pulled me out in the 8th grade, I don't know who that person is, but I think that person would deserve a lot of credit. Like I moved to New Jersey from New York in the 3rd grade, and I think I moved away from a school system that was overburdened and under-resourced into a school system that was a little less burdened and a little more resourced. But that difference, I think, like, for me, like, that was a substantial difference.
Yes.
And sort of being able to see that, I think that, like, increased, like, whatever, like, intrinsic sort of inner motivation that I would have had. So this, it doesn't, like, for me, the story is a little bit like more tied to like, here are these like circumstances that led to these outcomes, and being able to tell that story, like that feels meaningful. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit less tied to, here are some direct experiences that I had, and then this is how I overcame them. Like, I guess it's right. Like, my way of thinking about my story is not me oriented.
I see. Mine is.
That's fair.
So do you, okay, so, I mean, this is a thought that I have sometimes, which is, wow, I made it this far. Where else can I go? Like, I mean, why not? Like, I think privileged kids in the United States grow up with that thought
Just naturally, just
all the time.
this
Like,
is what's assumed.
I have a good friend. His dad was a president of a major university, an R1 university. And I remember, it's interesting because, when I was on my first attempt to go to graduate school, unsuccessful, I made a list of schools. I applied to them, and we were driving one day, and he said, "What schools are you applying to?" And I listed them off, blah, 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 a bunch of state schools. And one of them was Yale, actually. And then at the end, he just sort of nonchalantly said, "Oh, I think you should go to Yale." And I was like, "Well, why would you say that? Like, you got to find this mentor, advisor, all this kind of stuff." He goes, "Well, if you're going to become president of Rutgers," which is the school I was at the time, "it helps to have an Ivy League PhD." And I looked at this guy like, "Are you crazy?" But for him, that's perfect.
Totally,
his dad did it.
Yeah.
And he knew me well enough to be like,
"Oh, you could do this."
Why,
Yep.
You're not showing me that you have anything holding you back, in any way.
Yeah.
And so kind of as a late bloomer, I sometimes wonder, I just go, well, where could, I still have a few more years left, but, so do you ever have that thought?
Yeah, of course.
Is that part of your screenwriting fantasy?
No, not so much that. I have it two ways.
Okay.
One way kind of goes back to the sort of start of this earlier in the conversation, thinking about my kids and sort of thinking, well, where I am in life is, I'm in a position where I can help raise these people to do good things, or at least to have that mentality of, oh, what is it that I want to do in the world?
Why
I
not
can do
me?
it.
I like that saying. Why not me?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so more personally, when I think about it for myself, I care about events in the world, and I sort of think about maybe I would be useful in politics, or maybe I can be useful sort of doing more in the community, kind of trying to take or think about places like Elizabeth and think about the sort of full complement of people that I knew growing up, who I think I'm not particularly special compared to the full range of people that I knew. But obviously most of the people that I knew growing up are not, they don't have access to the same sort of resources that I have access to now.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about how, what either skills do I have? What tools do I have? What's my bandwidth to try to solve a big problem like that?
I see.
That tends to be where my thinking goes. So less on that creative end. I think that's really for me, and more on the sort of, and I'm sure you get it too. There's just a little bit of an element of I made it out, but I don't want to completely forget where I came from and who I knew, and sort of what's how important everyone else was for
Yes.
contributing to what I have now. So some of that is tied to my immediate family. But a lot of it is just kind of tied to the general sort of state of income disparities and wealth disparities in communities in America. As a professor, as a person who kind of has experienced some success, or at least has knowledge of that delta, how much further can I go to address those types of problems that I wouldn't say they keep me up at night, but
Right.
but they're definitely things that I sort of, when I talk to my friends about issues that I care about, that's what I'm talking about more often than not.
Yeah, I see that. For me, there is this sort of notion of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, giving back.
Yep.
And so I find it, for me, manifested in three places. So one is my immediate family, my sister and her kids, and my sometimes not so gentle coaxing to try to pull them out of Jersey thinking, Jersey living.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit provincial. Look, it's a nice place. I'm glad I'm glad Lawrence and I make a lot of jokes about New Jersey, but actually I feel lucky that I grew up there because it's a diverse place. It's a place that will toughen you up. And which, the world demands at least a little bit of toughness
for sure.
I think there's no doubt about that. And then, sort of culturally, there's some nice things about it in terms of like being close to those big cities in the Northeast and so on. But it's a big world that I wanted to go west. I was eager to do it when I was scared that I was going to live there forever.
Yeah. When did you know that you would?
I'd say I was around 22.
Okay.
I was like, I don't want to do that. So one is sort of coaxing them to try different things in the world, even if it's new foods or go to new places or try to think differently. That's the first one. The second one is with my students. So I teach MBAs, and I think that universities just do a terrible job of actually practically preparing students for the world. And so how can I kind of help my students succeed beyond just learning the X's, the blocking and tackling of marketing?
Yeah.
And then the third one is for other people more generally. This podcast might be an element of that. Like, how do you share ideas with people who are thirsting for ideas?
An outreach component.
Yes. And, I think, should I write another book, it will be much more focused on advice.
Got it.
I have a saying, I like to give advice, I like to take advice. And so I think that it would be more like, can I translate what I know now to help other people? So I get that idea. I don't feel like I'm as primarily motivated, it sounds like you are, in terms of thinking about that. But I find when I look at my actions, it reveals that desire.
That makes sense. I always have the feeling that I'm not doing enough.
Well, there's only, there's so many hours in the day. I get that idea. All right. So let's do some more sort of quick, faster stuff.
Okay.
So you're the Obi-Wan Kenobi of designated driving.
Yes.
So you don't drink.
I don't drink, no.
I've never asked you why you don't drink.
I never have. Some people think I'm a recovering alcoholic. And that's always a weird conversation. So we're like, no, I'm okay. Like, you don't have to worry about me. It's not painful at all. I think it's sort of like cross-generational, maybe recovering from alcoholism. So when I was growing up in Elizabeth, like there were like a few people in my life. My mom's boyfriend, I would say, was an alcoholic. I had a couple of friends who lived in my building, and their dad was kind of like the town drunk, sort of. Mm-hmm. And I had just enough exposure to, I would like think of them as negative role models, where I was like, oh, like that's what you're into. Like that's the thing that you cared about the most. Not for me. And I probably came to that point when I was 9 or 10.
Oh, wow.
And it stuck. And I don't have any reason to change. So there it is.
Yeah. Wow. You would have passed the marshmallow test. That's amazing. It's interesting. It's interesting you say this because I have had, I guess now, some alcoholism in my family. Mm-hmm. And I decided as a young man, I'd say more as a teen, that if I never drank, I could never become an alcoholic.
Got it.
So it was a similar kind of cost-benefit ratio. Yeah. I started drinking in my mid-20s.
What changed?
I kind of, I experimented with it a little bit, and my life didn't go off the rails.
Yeah.
And it was fun. Like, here's the thing. Drinking is fun.
I've heard this.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's fun. And so what's interesting is, now I'm doing very little of it because the fun is now being outweighed
by the costs.
And so it's just, to me, just like, well, that doesn't make sense to do anymore, you know, kind of a thing. And I know I never needed it. Like I went out I think as a senior in college, I went out 5 days a week with my friends and just didn't need it for a good time, you know, kind of thing. I'm glad I didn't. I think my life would have been different if I had drank as a
college student.
Certainly as a college student. I'm glad I didn't. I mean, I'm really glad I didn't.
You could have been on the Supreme Court.
Oh my God. You described yourself as a semi-retired gamer.
Yes.
And you and I have talked at length about gaming.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny. I find myself being more attracted to video games as my kids get older because they are becoming attracted to video games. And, you know, I think I had good taste when I played games. And I
What does that mean?
Well, I mean, there's some games that are just kind of like garbage and like not at all like mentally stimulating.
Yeah, by the way, I drink whiskey. I don't drink vodka, so I have good taste when it comes to alcohol.
Yeah, so it's like if you had a kid and you wanted to sit them down and be like, okay, like you're going to drink, but here's what you should know. Like here are like high quality ways to have a good experience, and then here are very low quality ways to have a very poor experience. In a similar way, like with video gaming, like I feel like I should steer them towards things that are interesting, like Zelda.
I see.
Or like here, like let's sit together and let me like sort of work through how to play this game. I think it'll be interesting to you. Whereas like so many things, especially with like phone culture, like you just have these like mindless like Candy Crush or
phone culture, mobile phones.
Mobile
I
phone
see.
Culture,
yes,
yeah.
Right.
These sorts of like very like sugary, empty, like kind of just like mind numbing for the sake of mind numbing, but there's not like a corresponding, interesting, stimulating aspect.
Problem solving, creative. I understand.
Yeah.
You know, this is how bad this phone thing is today. I was walking behind a slow walking student.
Thank you for clarifying.
And, I mean, I walk fast, so most students are walking slow, but this was especially slow. And I looked over his shoulder. He was walking and scrolling through Instagram.
They were going to say is like looking for Pokemon.
And I just felt like, I'm that curmudgeon right now. But you know what? It's not like, I'm not the curmudgeon. It's this. It's like, there's so many amazing things about life and the opportunities here. And I'm lamenting. Look, all right. We need to relax, right? It's important to relax, and it's important to have low energy, pleasurable activity.
Certainly.
I mean, it's part of how we're built.
Yeah.
That's not the time or place. And it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's bad. It's bad. You know what I mean? It's bad in a way that
it's hard to fully understand how far we've gone because
it's been
culture.
So slow.
It's been incremental. But when you think about, if you like divided up a person's day and looked at cognitive activity over the span of the day, how much of that for the average person right now is spent doing the most inane and useless things. That's kind of technology mediated. It's not all bad. But I understand this reaction very, very intimately.
Yeah, I know. I
kind of want my kids to be like not in that stream the same, like in a similar way that like I was out of it when I was growing up, right? I think it's just like very easy to fall into the habit of I have to be on the gram. I have to know what's going on. I have to like scroll through like the entire Twitter feed before I do anything else. I have to have my phone in my hand during meals, et cetera, et cetera. But there's I think a more thoughtful way to living that is not unavailable. It's just less, accessible.
It's so difficult. I would say this. I'm high self-control.
I gather that about you.
And I struggle with these things.
course.
Right. This is how difficult. I mean, I know, look,
that's how culture works.
I want to change the subject because I know we just sound like a cliche right now, but I actually do believe it's actually so important. Like with my MBAs this semester, it's been an ongoing conversation about these students are paying a lot of money. These are ambitious people. They have a lot riding on these 2 years and beyond. You know, how can you create by the way, I believe that the only solution is habits. It's not about self-control. It has to be all about habits. And it's hard to change those habits. So to your reformed gaming thing, you talked about sugar or candy. You know, it's called Candy Crush. You know what I mean? Like this idea. I had this revelation when I was about 15. I gave up candy. I stopped drinking soda and I stopped eating candy, and I never looked back. You know what I mean? No. Like it was one of those things that in the medium long term, I never even the craving left. When I was 18, I stopped playing video games. Same thing.
Yeah.
When I was in my 40s, I stopped watching football. Same thing.
Yeah, I'm actually right there with you on that.
Yeah. And just this semester, I've radically cut back on like web surfing, media consumption, etc.
Yeah.
In general. And they all fit the same definition of sugar. They're pleasurable in the moment. They actually have long-term costs. And once you move past the habit, you never attempt it again.
Yeah.
Because you realize that you don't miss it. You know what I mean? Like
exactly.
That kind of a thing.
Exactly.
I think they're interesting. They're sort of interesting puzzles. And I'm looking forward to more of the backlash that I think is going to come.
Backlash from students?
I think young people are going to, I think we're going to reach peak Instagram, and then at some point it's going to be cool to not do it.
Oh, hopefully that we're at that point now.
I hope so.
I hope.
That's my last question. What are you reading, watching, listening to, or I guess playing that is really good, that like really stands out?
I am going through a bit of a phase where I am rereading books from the past. So right now I'm about to finish Invisible Man.
Oh, wow.
And I enjoyed that. I would like, if someone asked me about it, I would say, oh, that's one of my favorite books. And I probably have read it like 3 times now total. But reading it now feels very, very alive.
I can imagine.
And it's also like, there's just like a lot of components to it that kind of have like a little bit of like these lessons for right now, and like conversations about like, what does it mean to be a person, or what does it mean to be a man, and like, what does it mean to be a black man, and then what does it mean to be a black man in this version of America.
Yes.
So I think of everything that I'm doing, like spanning all media, that's probably the highest quality thing that I'm into. It's a book that I think I was assigned it in high school.
Yeah.
I don't know when people read it or if people have picked it up lately, but I would definitely make a plug for it.
I read that book in high school and I felt I was too young for it. I mean, you know, I was a white kid in a black neighborhood and I still felt too young for it.
Yeah. It's a tough read.
It is interesting that we make kids read these books when they're in high school because it's the only time we can make kids read these books.
Yeah.
Am I right about that?
I would imagine.
Yeah.
I would imagine.
Like some translate, Catcher in a Rye translates very nicely to high school, but others less so. I want to get to and others you have, but I think I was listening. I'm terrible about this idea about, I read a lot. I mean, I'm sure I'm on pace for 100 books this year. Oh. I mean, of course I don't read them all deeply and, I skim and sometimes I read a chapter and throw it aside, et cetera. But like, there's always 10 books on my coffee table. I think that there's an alternative version, which is instead of reading all these new books, most of which are sort of middling, is to reread great books on a kind of regular basis.
Yeah.
So that's why when you said Invisible Man, I was like, because I feel like that, that's in that vein.
Yeah.
Of you might get more out of like having 100 amazing books that you kind of regularly reread. And remind yourself.
A little bit more the approach that I take. So like I'm probably like I'll be happy if I get to 20 books this year. The sort
by the way, I sound like such an asshole.
Oh,
being
it's
like,
fine.
I'm at 100 books.
It's fine. You're 5 times better than me. I can live with that. But when I do decide that I'm going to read something, like there's always this, what do I like? And then what haven't I seen in a while?
Mm-hmm.
And because we change as people, the books change.
Yes.
So like when I read Invisible Man in high school, I read it in college, and I'm reading it now. And I would say that like I'm probably 3 different people at those 3 stages. And the way that the words are resonating with my thoughts and the like integration is very new, very novel. That aspect of reading is something that I appreciate a lot. So I find myself rereading things either that I've picked up in high school or college that I just remember, like either, I remember that this was something that I couldn't put down.
Mm-hmm.
Let me like check it out again. Or this felt really important to me when I was younger. I wonder how it would feel to me now.
Yeah, I can see that. Anything else on your list? Okay.
I didn't have a list.
Okay, that's good. Lawrence, thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
You're a good friend and a good colleague, and so I'm thrilled to get you on the pod.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit petermcgraw.org for more information about our guest, show notes, and social media links. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with others. Join Dr. Peter